Now, on Kraut's interpretation of the unexamined life is not worth living idea, we have what you might think of as a hierarchical view of the value that a life can have and the value of self-examination, such as it's capable of producing such a life. Think of Kraut's view as a hierarchical view in the following sense, that you could be at a reasonably moderate level of fulfillment and value in life by engaging in minimal or no self-examination, but you'd be missing something. Just as you could live a perfectly decent life, but if you don't have love, then that life will be missing something that most of us would consider to be a valuable part of any full life. Notice this hierarchical view is one that we can distinguish from what you might call a pluralist view, where a pluralist view can say there are many things that make life valuable, but a single life can be completely and fully valuable without having all of those inside of it. So somebody might say, look, I just love playing music, and I want to play music, and I want to compose music, and I want to listen to music, but I don't want to engage in self-examination. I don't want to engage in any of that self-analysis that the philosophers are suggesting that we do. That's fine for other people, it's not for me. If you're a pluralist, then you say of that music person, the person who's obsessed with music and who loves music and is apparently very happy playing and enjoying all the music that she can, that if you're a hierarchical person, you'll say that person has a hole in their soul, they're missing something of value, even if they think that they're not. Whereas if you're a pluralist, you'll say, fine. There are many different ways of living a full life. Being a musician is one. Being a self-examining philosophy type is another. Being someone who loves to travel is the third way. You can travel and get all kinds of interesting experiences by going around the world and seeing different cultures, different societies, different types of people, different kinds of architecture, different types of landscape. And if you don't engage in self-examination, that's all right, so long as you live a full life. You can do that without doing the self-examination that Socrates is suggesting on this interpretation. So we have the strictest reading of the unexamined life is not worth living view, according to which if you don't engage in self-examination, your life is below the zero line. We've got the more moderate notion of self-examination, that is the one propounded by Kraut, who says you can live a life above the zero line even if you don't engage in self-examination, but your life will be missing something that any full life would need to have to count as full. And then there's the what you might call pluralist view that says there are lots of different ways of living perfectly full lives, only some of which involve self-examination. But you can live a perfectly full life, not missing anything of value, so long, even without engaging in self-examination, so long as you do what you love. So I want you to think about which of those three different interpretations concerning the unexamined life is the one that you find most plausible, and think about how you'd go about defending your answer to that question as best you could. And I want to suggest that I suspect Kraut would say that the pluralist is propounding a way of living that is in a way, so to speak, fragile. That is, if you don't engage in self-examination, you might get lucky and live a life that's full. But I think he'd probably argue that it's also the case that you could be unlucky and have your life motivated, activated by principles that are not ones that on reflection you would think are necessarily the best. So for example, think about some ways in which we do things that are sometimes puzzling to us. I've often asked my students, if you could understand something about yourself that you can't figure out, what is it that you'd like to understand? An answer I often get is, for example, students would like to know why they are so often likely to procrastinate. Why do I procrastinate when I've got an assignment due? Why do I always put it off to the last minute? And I don't have an answer to the question that applies to all students, but one thing that I've noticed in some of my students and some of my friends when I was growing up particularly was the following kind of psychological characteristic. Some people often present themselves as being very flaky, as being someone who always puts things off to the last minute. And then when they turn in an assignment and they get a mediocre grade on it, they can always say, yeah, well, I was a flake, I should have started earlier, I only turned it in late, so I should be lucky with the grade that I've got. Notice that someone who does something like that might, I don't say necessarily is, but might be protecting a hidden belief about themselves. That is, they might have a hidden belief that they're great, that they're extremely talented, brilliant, incredibly gifted at something. But that if they never put that belief about themselves to the test by giving themselves a chance to try something and give it their very best shot, start early and revise and edit and revise and improve and spit shine and so forth, and then do your very best and submit what you think is your very best work, that puts you in danger of still getting a B- or something of the kind after giving it your best shot. And if that happens, that's going to probably puncture your very high self-image about your own talents. So my impression has been that sometimes people who want to preserve and never have to challenge their own very high self-image about some aspects of their own talents can always protect that by never giving something the best shot, always being a little bit lackadaisical about something, always being late or disorganized or flaky in some form or another. And then when they don't do well, can always say, yeah, well, I guess I'm a flake. I guess didn't have my act together. I'll try harder next time, knowing full well on some level that they never will, or it may take a long time before they do so, simply because they've strongly motivated not to give something their best shot, because giving something your very best shot sometimes requires putting some aspect of yourself on the line, up for potential test, and perhaps showing that you're not quite as talented as you thought you were. Another example is, many people often, we talked about in the discussion of deontological ethics, the possibility of using someone as a mere means as opposed to just as a means, or as opposed to as a means. And someone can get into the habit of using others as means to their own purposes, and more precisely as mere means, without always paying attention to the fact that they're doing so. Somebody's life might be permeated by their capacity and tendency to use others in a way that's potentially exploitative. If they don't engage in self-examination, they might never find that out about themselves and engage in any kind of constructive change. Another example, in recent pop culture, some of you might have noticed the term humble brag. That is a term that was coined recently by people thinking that there's a phenomenon in which somebody is bragging about themselves, but doing so under the guise of complaining or whining about something, about some difficulty they're having. So suppose you're in your senior year of college and you've got a friend who comes to you and says, it is so difficult, I do not know what to do. It's just a terrible situation I'm in. And you say, what is it? And they reply, well, here's the problem. I can't decide whether to accept a job with Microsoft or with Google. What should I do? It's terrible. You might be turning green at the gills with jealousy with someone like that, because those might very well be very attractive jobs. The person is presumably bragging about these wonderful job offers that they have, but putting it forth as a complaint, as a way of coming across as about their own problems, about how humble they are. And again, the Socratic idea, as propounded by someone like Kraut, is going to be, if only they were to engage in some self-examination, they might become aware of the fact that their seeming complaint, their seeming whining, is really motivated by a desire to brag. And that might get them to change their behavior as a result. The suggestion here is then that the pluralist doesn't give us any clear way of suggesting that such a person could and should and would benefit from more self-examination to make their behavior more appropriate and useful and helpful for others. Instead, what they do is they keep on in the path that they're sticking in, and perhaps might go like that and behave like that for the rest of their lives. That's the suggestion that, therefore, the pluralist is in danger of propounding lives, supporting lives that are too fragile. You might get lucky and live a good life, or you might get unlucky and be routed and routinized into habits that are not productive for you and not productive for others. That's one way of thinking about a possible criticism of the pluralist view in favor of the more hierarchical view of the value of self-examination.